HP Art History. We are in the week of April 20th through the 24th. We are down to our last six slides. So I'm going to start us off with this particular painting. It's called The Bay, and it's done by the artist. It's a woman. Her name is Helen Frankenthaler, done in 1963, and it's acrylic on canvas. And she is part of an umbrella called the Abstract Expressionist. She's also more classified, more specifically, you could also put her down as a color field painter. And so, what we're going to discuss today is just a little bit starting off about the type of painting that she does. So, Helen Frankenthaler, when she became an adult, and she was a dominant artist already established before she even made the Bay in America, she's under, again, the particular art movement called the Abstract Expressionists. And this included painters such as William de Kooning, which we've already seen, who did the Woman One, and then Jackson Pollock. And both of those are classified, again, under abstract expressionists. They're more in the field of action painters, whose work show mood of frenzy and a lot of action. So Frankenthaler visited Pollock in his studio in 1951 and was deeply affected by his placing large pieces of unprimed canvas on the floor and then using his whole body to drip, splash, pour paint on the canvas. And she was so fascinated by the spontaneity and improvisation and the combination of this artistic control and chance in Pollock's drip method. So if you can just put down for a vocabulary word, drip method. So that's where, and again, we're not seeing that specifically with Helen Frankenthaler, but so that you can have a better understanding. This is Jackson Pollock. And you can see he's the one that does these very large canvases. Look at the way that he is using his body. He's flinging. He's not doing any type of realism or specific, figure drawing. It's purely just flinging the paint and the paintbrushes and having that experience. So in this particular method, this is called the drip method. So I just want you to have this term down because I'm going to then tell you a little bit about more what Helen Frankenthaler does. So these are two images of Jackson Pollock. Okay, so um, after this experience, Frankenthaler really began to develop her own manner of pouring diluted oil, and later on she would use acrylic. So in this case, this particular painting had acrylic paint onto raw canvas. And this method is called the soak stain method. So again, this is where she's pouring the diluted paint, and in particular, she's using the acrylic paint onto raw canvas. And so what would happen is the liquid color would stain the canvas in an organic looking pool. And you can kind of clearly see that being depicted here. And Frankenthaler would further manipulate the paint as she poured from coffee cans by spreading it with sponges or wipes. Because of the thin washes of pigment soak into the canvas rather than rest on top of it, the white fabric would shine through the color and irradiating the color with light like stained glass. Denser zones could contrast vividly against the open, expansive field of lush color. So I think you can, again, just kind of get that sense here. By the early 1960s, she began using acrylic paints, which she thinned and poured. The Bay is the first of these, and she could also, as far as when she was doing her soak stain method, she would also would tilt the canvas to make the paint flow. So she, in some parts, would have a little bit of manipulation of where the paint was going to go, but at the same time, as the artist, you don't really have that control as to what direction the paint is going to ultimately be left. Frankenthaler is often included in discussions of color field painters, a variant of the abstract expressionist. That's why I said you can classify her as abstract expressionist, but more specifically, she's under the umbrella of the color field painters. And basically, again, their method, and if you wanted to put that as a term, whose broad expanses of color result in a calm, meditative mood instead of the frenzied, restless impact on Pollock's interlacing lines of paint. So you can clearly see the distinction between the way that he has his brush strokes. You can get the sense of where his brushstrokes had been from the paintbrush itself, as opposed to Frankenthaler, who wasn't even using, for the most part, a paintbrush. And I had this one pouring paint on the surface rather than painting the colors onto the surface with a brush. So just making that distinction. And I just wanted to quote from the Kahn article. There was a very good Kahn article for this particular piece, and Frankenthaler had a friend who was an art critic, and he believed that if art made after the trauma of the Second World War was going to have any real impact on the social consciousness of Americans, it would have to radically change and move towards this abstract. So when I was mentioning earlier this kind of calm, meditative mood that one would get if doing this type of a process would ultimately just be another way of exploring the use of abstract expressionism and just being a variant of the difference between Jackson Pollock and the way that he has his more again it's not fully controlled, but with his being more classified in that action painting. So the color field painting, it also emphasizes paintings based on painting's basic properties. The color field painter would pour the paint onto unprimed canvas and allow the pigments to soak in. So again, that's that soak stain, the color field painting. Um, it is hard. It is hard to conceive of another painting method resulting in such literal flatness. The images created, such as the Bay by Helen Frankenthaler, appear spontaneous, almost accidental. And I think that was, again, the whole interpretation of doing such pieces like this. In adapting to her stain techniques to the new medium, which is she was now exploring into acrylics, Frankenthaler created shapes in semi-transparent atmospheric tones and in brilliant in disuse of color, which just means the state of not being used, with distinct and strong edges. And you can really kind of get that sense here, where you can see the ending of the indigo, the blue, as it forms into the other color of the green. She allowed herself for accidents and intuition while controlling the interplay of form, color, and space. And again, you can kind of clearly see that. The sense of natural spontaneity and devotion to color is part of what makes the Bay and other works of the color field painters so compelling. The basic formal elements of a painting speak for themselves as the viewer experiences the work in a fundamental, direct manner. So that's really all I wanted to include for my notes for today, for Helen Frankenthaler's The Bay. Okay? All right, this is Mrs. Howard signing out.